When did you risk your life helping a friend? My new friend Sadie called me from a bar bathroom sobbing, begging me to pick her up because she'd just seen her psycho ex's truck circling the place. When I got there 15 minutes later, she stumbled into my car reeking of tequila, crying Tom had tracked her down. She'd moved to a different part of the country to get away from him. I started driving toward her apartment, taking side streets to make her feel better. We were 3 blocks from the bar when I noticed the black pickup truck 2 cars behind us. It took the first turn I did, then the second, maintaining that exact 2-car buffer. When I changed lanes, it changed lanes. When I slowed down, it slowed down. I glanced at Sadie in the rearview mirror, asleep. I figured that was better so she wouldn't freak out. At a red light, I got a better look at the truck. I could make out the shape of someone huge behind the wheel staring straight ahead at my car. The light turned green and my hand shook as I shifted gears, trying to act normal while my heart hammered against my ribs. The truck matched my speed perfectly, maintaining those 2 cars between us like a professional. I decided to test it and took a sudden right without signaling. The 2 cars between us went straight, but the truck yanked across traffic to follow, horns blaring. Now it was just him and me, no buffer. My hands were slick with sweat and I had to wipe them on my jeans one at a time. Sadie stirred and mumbled something about feeling sick. In my mirror, I could see him clearly now, both hands gripping his steering wheel, leaning forward like he was trying to push his truck faster through sheer will. I sped up to 45 in a 30 zone, my whole body tense. He sped up. I slowed to 20. He slowed to 20. When I stopped at a stop sign, he stopped so close his headlights filled my entire rear window, turning everything in my car stark white and shadow. My foot was shaking on the brake pedal. Sadie woke up squinting and asked what was happening, but I just told her to keep her head down, my voice coming out high and scared. The truck revved its engine, this deep growling sound that vibrated through my seat and made me want to floor it right through the intersection. At the next intersection, I ran the red light, praying no cops were around, my heart in my throat as I checked for cross traffic. The truck followed without hesitation, nearly clipping a sedan that had to slam its brakes. He was done pretending this was coincidence. I took a hard left onto a main road, tires squealing, and pushed it to 60. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I kept checking the mirror obsessively. The truck stayed right behind me, maybe 10 feet from my bumper. When I changed lanes to pass a slow car, he changed lanes. When I swerved back, he swerved back. Sadie was fully awake now, turned around in her seat watching him. "That's Tom's truck," she said, her drunk slur replaced by cold fear. I tried to stay calm and told her we'd go to the police station instead, but my voice cracked. When I tried to change direction at the next light, Tom accelerated and tapped my bumper, just hard enough to make my car lurch forward. Sadie screamed. I bit my tongue from the impact and tasted blood. He tapped us again, harder this time, and I heard something crack in my rear bumper. I floored it through a yellow light, my whole leg shaking so bad I could barely keep the pedal down. Tom came right through the red behind us. He pulled alongside me in the left lane, pacing me, and I could see him screaming something through his passenger window. His face was purple with rage, spit visible on the glass. He swerved toward us, and I yanked the wheel right to avoid him, tires shrieking, my whole body rigid with terror. Sadie was crying and begging me to go faster, but we were already doing 70 in a 40 zone, and my hands were trembling so bad I could barely keep the car straight. Tom dropped back behind us again and rammed us properly this time, hard enough that my head snapped back. The impact pushed us into the oncoming lane, and I had to fight the wheel to get back over, screaming as headlights came straight at us. He rammed us again, and my bumper made a horrible scraping sound as it partially detached. I was crying now too, just trying to keep us alive while Sadie fumbled with her phone trying to call for help. I saw her apartment complex ahead and made a split-second decision to just get her home where we could run inside and lock the doors. I took the turn into her complex so fast we went up on 2 wheels for a second, my stomach dropping like a roller coaster. Tom's truck was too big to take the turn at that speed and overshot it, brakes screaming. We had maybe 30 seconds while he turned around. I screeched into Sadie's driveway and we both fumbled with our seatbelts, hands shaking so bad we couldn't get them undone. We were halfway to her front door when Tom's truck roared into the driveway behind us, high beams blazing, pinning us in the light like deer. He'd blocked my car in completely. Tom stepped out of his truck holding a baseball bat, walking toward us slowly, taking his time because he knew we had nowhere to run. "Sadie," he screamed, "tell your little boyfriend we're going to have a little chat." He took another step closer and the bat made this soft tapping sound against his leg that sent ice through my whole body. I grabbed Sadie's arm and pulled her behind me, while my other hand fumbled in her purse for her keys, my fingers shaking so bad I couldn't get a grip on them. Tom was yelling that I had 5 seconds to get out of his way or he'd put me in the hospital. 4 seconds. 3. My hand finally closed around the keys and I shoved them at Sadie, who was already at her door trying to get the right one in the lock. The deadbolt was stuck and she was crying and twisting the key so hard I thought it might break. Tom was close enough now that I could smell the beer on him, this sour stink that made my stomach turn. "We don't want any trouble," I said way too loud, my voice cracking. "Just let us go inside and we can all calm down." He laughed, this ugly sound that wasn't really a laugh at all. A woman's voice suddenly cut through the night from somewhere above us. "I'm filming all of this." I looked up and saw someone on the second floor balcony holding up her phone with the flashlight on. "Already called 911, so you better get out of here." Tom's head snapped up to look at her and his whole face went darker, like a storm cloud passing over. He swung the bat hard into my car's taillight and plastic exploded everywhere, little red pieces bouncing off the concrete. The sound made me jump back into Sadie, who was still fighting with that stuck lock, sobbing harder now. My hand found the car keys in my pocket and I hit the panic button without even thinking about it. The alarm started screaming and the lights started flashing bright white and orange, lighting up the whole parking lot like a disco. More lights turned on in the apartments around us and I could see faces appearing in windows, people pulling back curtains to see what was happening. Tom's eyes darted around at all the witnesses, and for the first time, he looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I kept myself between him and Sadie, trying to make my voice steady. "The cops are coming, man. This isn't worth it. Just leave," he answered by swinging the bat again, this time catching my side mirror, which cracked and hung there by its wires, swinging back and forth. Behind me, I heard the lock finally click, and Sadie practically fell backwards through the door. She grabbed my shirt and yanked me so hard I stumbled, Tom lunging forward at the same time. We slammed the door just as his shoulder hit it, and the whole frame shook like it might come off its hinges. I threw the deadbolt while Sadie fumbled with the chain, both of us breathing so hard we sounded like we'd run a marathon. Tom was pounding on the door with the bat, screaming about what he'd do when he found us again, how this wasn't over, how Sadie belonged to him. Each hit made the door jump in its frame, and I pressed my whole body against it like that would somehow help. Then I heard it, sirens in the distance getting louder. The pounding stopped so sudden that the silence felt wrong. Through the peephole, I watched Tom sprint back to his truck, the bat still in his hand. His tires screamed as he backed out so fast he clipped a trash can, sending it rolling across the parking lot. Then he was gone, just red taillights disappearing around the corner. My legs gave out, and I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor. Sadie collapsed next to me, and we just sat there shaking, both of us covered in sweat even though it wasn't hot. My hands were trembling so bad I couldn't even make a fist. The sirens got louder and louder until I saw the red and blue lights through the window. About 3 minutes after Tom left, someone knocked on the door, 3 solid knocks that made us both jump. "Police, we got a call about a disturbance." I looked through the peephole and saw a cop standing there, but I was still so scared I couldn't move. "Can you show me your badge?" I asked, my voice barely working. He held it up to the peephole, and I made him do it again because my eyes wouldn't focus right. Finally, I opened the door with the chain still on, just enough to see him better. Officer Vikram Law, that's what his name tag said. He was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with kind eyes that made me feel a little less like I was going to throw up. "We got multiple calls about someone with a bat threatening people," he said. "Are you folks okay?" I unhooked the chain and opened the door the rest of the way, my whole body still shaking. Behind him, I could see 2 more police cars and cops talking to the woman from the balcony who'd been filming. Tom following them with exactly 2 cars between like he's some kind of professional tracker makes me wonder what his actual plan was here. That level of control while supposedly being in a rage doesn't quite add up. Was he trying to intimidate, or— My car sat there looking sad with its broken lights and dangling mirror, pieces of red plastic scattered all around it like confetti from the world's worst party. Officer Law asked if we needed medical attention while his partner walked around my car taking pictures and writing stuff down on a clipboard. Sadie tried to tell him what happened, but she kept mixing up the order of things and crying harder every time she said Tom's name, her words slurring together from all the tequila she'd had at the bar. I had to keep filling in the gaps while Law wrote everything in his little notebook, asking us to slow down and repeat parts, because Sadie would start one story, then jump to something that happened 3 years ago when they were still together. The cop kept looking between us, trying to piece together the timeline while Sadie hiccuped and swayed on her feet. His partner came back shaking his head and showed Law photos on his phone of my smashed bumper and the dents where Tom had rammed us, plus all the broken glass and plastic pieces scattered across the parking lot. Miriam came down the stairs from her apartment carrying her phone and walked straight up to Officer Law, telling him she'd filmed the whole thing from her balcony, including Tom swinging that bat at my car. She played the video for him right there, the sound of metal hitting glass making me flinch all over again, and you could hear her voice on the recording saying she was calling 911. Law took down her name and phone number, asking if she'd be willing to give a statement, and she said absolutely. She saw everything from when we pulled in until Tom took off. She pointed out exactly where he'd been standing and which direction his truck went, even remembering it was a black Chevy with a cracked left taillight. Officer Law explained they'd put out an alert for Tom's truck, but without him actually here, they couldn't make an arrest, which made my stomach drop, because what good was calling the cops if they couldn't do anything? He gave us a case number written on a little card and said a detective would follow up in a day or two, but standing there looking at my wrecked car, it felt like we were on our own. Sadie started crying harder, saying Tom would come back to finish what he started, and the officer said we should consider staying somewhere else tonight, just to be safe. I pulled out my phone to call a tow truck while Law finished taking Miriam's statement, my hands still shaking so bad I could barely type the number. The tow driver said he'd be there in 30 minutes, and when he showed up, he took one look at my car and whistled, saying the whole rear end was smashed and the frame might be bent. He hooked it up to his truck while telling me it wasn't safe to drive and I'd need serious body work, probably looking at least at my $500 deductible, which I definitely didn't have sitting in my bank account. Miriam went back upstairs and came down with a bag of frozen peas from my neck, which was killing me from when Tom rammed us, and my head snapped back. She also had a first aid kit with gauze for my tongue, which was still bleeding from where I'd bitten it during the impact, and when I spit into a tissue, it came out pink. The cops left after giving us more cards with victim services numbers and telling us to call if Tom showed up again, their cars pulling away and leaving us standing in the parking lot at 2 in the morning. Sadie turned on me suddenly, saying this was my fault for bringing her here instead of driving straight to the police station like she'd wanted. I snapped back that she could have mentioned her psycho ex was in town before I picked her up, and we went back and forth getting louder until Miriam stepped between us. We both stopped and looked at each other, realizing we were just scared and taking it out on the wrong person, and Sadie grabbed my hand, squeezing it while we both said sorry at the same time. Miriam said we should document our injuries for the police report and offered to drive us to the urgent care place that was was open all night. We piled into her Honda, me in the back holding the bag of peas against my neck, while Sadie sat up front still sniffling. The urgent care waiting room had that gross hospital smell and fluorescent lights that made everything look green. The nurse called us back one at a time, taking photos of the bruising already showing up purple on my neck and writing notes about my swollen tongue. She gave me papers about concussion symptoms to watch for and said I was lucky it wasn't worse, which didn't make me feel very lucky at all. Sadie got checked too, the nurse documenting some bruises on her arms from when she'd braced herself during the chase, plus checking her blood alcohol level for the report. We finally got back to Sadie's apartment around 4:30 in the morning, Miriam saying to call if we needed anything before heading back upstairs. I crashed on Sadie's couch, still wearing my clothes from earlier, too tired to even take my shoes off. My phone buzzed with a voicemail notification, and when I played it, there was just heavy breathing and the sound of an engine revving over and over, making my whole body go cold because I knew it was Tom, and somehow he'd gotten my number. I deleted it immediately but couldn't fall back asleep, just lying there staring at the ceiling and jumping at every sound outside. Officer Law called around 9 the next morning, asking how we were doing and giving us information about getting a protective order from the courthouse. He gave me another number for someone named Priya Lockhart, who he said was a domestic violence advocate who could help us navigate all the legal stuff. When I told Sadie about it, she shook her head, saying she was too embarrassed and this whole mess was her fault for dating Tom in the first place. She kept saying she should have known better and she didn't want some stranger judging her for staying with him as long as she did. Miriam knocked on the door around noon with sandwiches, and when Sadie repeated what she'd said about being embarrassed, Miriam sat down next to her on the couch. She told Sadie that shame is what keeps people trapped in bad situations and there's no judgment in asking for help when you need it. That the only person who should be embarrassed is Tom for being such a piece of garbage. The next morning I had to call my supervisor and tell her I'd be late, and when she asked why I just said I had a personal emergency, she wasn't happy and reminded me I'd already used my sick days this month, but I couldn't exactly explain that I'd spent the night dealing with a stalker situation. When I finally got to work around 10, everyone kept looking at me weird, probably because I looked like hell from not sleeping. I jumped when someone walked behind my desk to get to the printer, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely type. My coworker asked if I was okay, and I just nodded and tried to focus on my computer screen, but I kept checking my phone every 5 minutes to make sure Sadie was all right. That afternoon, we drove to the Domestic Violence Center to meet with Priya, who turned out to be this calm woman in her 40s who'd clearly done this 1,000 times. She sat us down in a small office with posters about safety planning on the walls and walked us through everything step by step. She told us to vary our routines, never take the same route twice, check under our cars before getting in, keep our phones charged at all times, and have 3 different people we could call if something happened. She gave us these little cards with emergency numbers and showed Sadie how to set up her phone so she could call 911 with just one button. Priya also helped us think through safe places we could go if Tom showed up, like stores with security cameras or the police station, and she made us practice what we'd say to 911 to get the fastest response. The next day, we went to the courthouse to file for a temporary protective order, which meant sitting in a waiting room for 2 hours before someone called us back. The clerk gave us this huge stack of papers to fill out, asking for every detail about what Tom had done, when he'd done it, and who witnessed it. Sadie had to write out everything that happened, starting from when they were together and he'd hit her, all the way through the car chase, and by the time she finished writing her statement, her hand was cramping and she was crying again. We had to list Tom's full name, address, workplace, car make and model, and any weapons he might have, which made Sadie remember he had a gun collection at his place. After another hour of waiting, we finally got called in to see the judge, who was this older guy who barely looked up from the papers while Sadie explained why she needed protection. The judge signed the order and told us it would be good for 2 weeks, but then he dropped a bomb that it wasn't valid until Tom was actually served with the papers. He explained that someone from the sheriff's office would have to physically hand Tom the documents, and until that happened, the order meant nothing. We asked how long that would take, and the clerk just shrugged and said it depended on whether they could find him. 3 days went by, and we kept calling the sheriff's office to check if they'd served Tom yet, but every time they said they couldn't find him at his last known address or his workplace. The process server told us Tom's apartment manager said he hadn't been there in days, and his boss at the construction site said he hadn't shown up to work all week. They told us to stay alert and call 911 if we saw him, but I wanted to scream at them that the whole point was to keep him away from us, not wait until he showed up again. On the 4th night, I was making dinner when my phone buzzed with a text from Miriam saying she'd just seen a black truck circle our parking lot twice real slow. My stomach dropped and I ran to the window but couldn't see anything, so I called 911 while Sadie grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer. Getting served protection papers sounds harder than getting served at a fancy restaurant. Tom's playing hide and seek while these two are stuck playing sitting ducks with kitchen knives. The dispatcher said they'd send someone to check it out, but by the time the cops showed up 20 minutes later, there was no sign of any truck. The officer said without plates or proof it was Tom, there wasn't much they could do, and I wanted to throw something at him for being so useless. I wasn't sleeping at all by this point, just lying on Sadie's couch with my eyes open, listening to every car that drove by and every footstep in the hallway. Every time the building creaked or someone slammed a door, I'd jump up and check the windows, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I maybe got 3 hours of sleep a night if I was lucky, and I was running on so much coffee my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Sadie was worse, waking up screaming from nightmares, and then staying up the rest of the night watching the door with a baseball bat in her lap. The insurance adjuster finally came to look at my car, and when he finished his estimate, I almost threw up. Between the deductible and what what they wouldn't cover, I was looking at $1,500 out of pocket, plus rental car costs, since mine would be in the shop for at least a week. My credit card was already maxed from buying groceries for both of us, since Sadie was too scared to leave the apartment to go to work, and now I had no idea how I'd pay for the repairs. Then Sadie found Tom's social media and showed me these posts he'd been making. Stuff like, "Some people don't know when they've got a good thing," and "Betrayal always comes back around," with angry face emojis. It was obviously about her, but vague enough that when we showed it to the cops, they said it didn't count as a direct threat. Priya told us to screenshot everything anyway and keep adding it to our file, so we spent an hour going through all his accounts and saving every post that seemed even slightly threatening. By the end of the week, my supervisor pulled me into her office and shut the door, which is never a good sign. She said my performance had been slipping. I'd been late 3 times, and other people had noticed I seemed distracted and jumpy. She gave me an official warning and said if things didn't improve, we'd have to discuss my future at the company. Then she mentioned the employee assistance program had free counseling sessions, sliding the brochure across her desk with this look that said she knew something was seriously wrong with me. I took the brochure and left her office with my hands shaking, knowing she was right about everything being wrong with me. That night, I showed Sadie the brochure while we sat on her couch eating takeout Chinese food. She was picking at her lo mein and said the protective order hearing was next week and she wasn't sure she could do it. Her hands kept moving, folding and unfolding the paper napkin over and over while she talked about how testifying might make Tom even madder. I put my hand on hers to stop the napkin folding and told her whatever she decided was okay with me. She deserved to feel safe no matter what that looked like for her. The week passed in a blur of work and watching Sadie pace around the apartment, changing her mind every few hours. The morning of the hearing, we got to the courthouse early and sat on the hard wooden benches outside the courtroom. Priya showed up with a thick folder of papers and sat next to us going over what would happen. We waited for 2 hours watching other cases go in and out of the courtroom doors. Tom never showed up, and neither did anyone who looked like they might be his lawyer. Finally, a woman in a suit came out asking for Sadie's case number and told Priya that Tom's lawyer had filed for a continuance. She said they claimed they weren't properly notified, even though Priya had all the paperwork showing they were. The judge came out for 30 seconds to extend the temporary order, but said we had to come back in 2 weeks. Walking back to the car felt like we'd run a marathon for nothing and had to start all over again. The next week was quiet, but the quiet was almost worse than when things were happening. Every black truck I saw on the road made my heart pound, and I'd have to check a license plate. Sadie wouldn't leave the apartment unless she absolutely had to, and even then, only with me. She quit going to work and started calling in sick every day until they fired her over the phone. I'd catch her standing at the window with the curtain pulled back just a tiny bit, watching the parking lot. At night, she'd wake up at every sound, and I'd find her checking the door locks again. Priya came over one afternoon with paperwork for a transitional housing program that would move Sadie somewhere safe. The address would be confidential, and Tom wouldn't be able to find it, even if he tried looking. But it meant Sadie would have to leave everything behind, including her job and all her friends here. She'd get a small apartment in another city and help finding a new job, but it would take time. Sadie filled out the forms slowly, like each answer hurt to write down on the page. I finally called the number on the employee assistance brochure and made an appointment with a therapist for the following week. Admitting I needed help felt like giving up, but I couldn't keep jumping at shadows and checking my mirrors constantly. The intake appointment was in a small office building downtown, and I had to fill out 20 pages of forms. The therapist was an older woman who listened while I talked about everything that had happened with Tom. She said what I was feeling was normal after trauma, and we'd work on coping strategies together over time. 3 days later, Priya called with news that Tom had finally been served with the protective order papers. They'd found him at his mother's house in another state, and a sheriff's deputy had handed him the papers personally. The order was now enforceable, which meant he had to stay 500 feet away from Sadie at all times, but that only helped if we saw him coming from far enough away to do something about it. Sadie got approved for the transitional housing program, but wouldn't be able to move in for another month. We started packing her things into boxes a little at a time, being careful about when we went to the storage unit. We'd leave at different times each day and take different routes so nobody could track our pattern. I'd watch the mirrors the whole time, and Sadie would sit turned around watching behind us constantly. Work was getting better since I'd explained some of what happened to my supervisor without giving her all the details. She moved my desk away from the window and let me take breaks when I needed to calm down. But loud noises still made me jump, and slam sounds from the warehouse made my whole body go tight. I started picking up overtime shifts when I could to help pay for everything that had piled up lately. Then we got a letter from Tom's lawyer saying he was entering anger management and wanted the protective order dropped. The letter talked about how he was getting help and just wanted to move on with his life peacefully. Priya said this was typical manipulation and we shouldn't respond or even acknowledge we'd gotten the letter at all. But it made Sadie start second-guessing everything and wondering if maybe he really was trying to change this time. She'd stare at the letter for hours, like the words might change if she looked long enough. My car was finally done at the shop after weeks of waiting for parts to come in for the bumper. The bill was huge, even with insurance covering most of it, and I had to put the deductible on my credit card. Between that and the rental car costs, I was behind on my electric bill and phone bill already. The overtime helped, but being exhausted all the time made the anxiety worse, and I'd lose track of conversations. I'd be at work trying to focus on spreadsheets, but my mind would drift to checking exits and windows constantly. 2 weeks later, I got another court summons and had to take more time off work for the hearing. The courtroom was smaller this time, with just me and Sadie and our lawyer on one side, while Tom appeared on a TV screen from wherever he'd run off to. He wore a button-up shirt shirt and kept his hands folded like he was at church, telling the judge he was getting help and wouldn't contact Sadie anymore. The judge extended the protective order for a year, but said it would be harder to enforce with him in another state. After the hearing, Miriam from our building called a safety meeting in the lobby, and about 20 neighbors showed up with coffee and cookies. People I'd never talked to before were sharing how they'd installed doorbell cameras and motion lights after what happened. One older guy said he'd started checking the parking lot at night, and another woman offered to walk with anyone who felt unsafe. It was nice knowing people were looking out for each other, even if it came from something terrible. A month passed, and Sadie's move-out date finally came around. I helped her pack the last boxes while we both tried not to cry about her leaving. She taped up boxes of kitchen stuff and clothes while I wrapped her pictures in newspaper. We didn't talk much, but kept bumping into each other and hugging. She was scared, but also relieved to go somewhere Tom couldn't find her. We set up a secure messaging app on our phones and promised to stay in touch. The moving truck pulled away, and I stood in her empty apartment for a while before locking up and giving the keys to the manager. I moved back to my own place that weekend, but kept checking my locks over and over before bed. The therapist said being super aware of everything was normal after trauma and gave me breathing exercises to try. We worked on coping strategies every week, but progress was slow, and some days I'd still jump at normal sounds. My coworkers stopped asking if I was okay, which helped me focus better on actually doing my job. 6 weeks after Sadie left, I got a text from her saying she'd settled into her new place and was feeling safer. I wonder if Tom picked another state on purpose to make it harder to enforce the protective order. How did he even know to do that? She'd started a new job at a dental office and was seeing a counselor there too. She sent a picture of her new apartment with plants in the windows and said she was taking things one day at a time. I saved the picture and looked at it whenever I worried about her. 3 months after that night with Tom chasing us, I still tensed up seeing black trucks, but I was functioning better overall. Work was back to normal, and I'd caught up on all the projects I'd fallen behind on. My car was finally fixed with a new bumper and paint job that cost way too much. I was slowly paying down the credit card debt from everything, making extra payments when I could. The rental car bill alone had been crazy, and the therapy co-pays added up fast, but at least I could drive without checking my mirrors every 5 seconds now. Then Priya called one afternoon while I was grocery shopping to check in on how I was doing. She mentioned Tom had violated the protective order by calling Sadie's mom trying to find out where she'd moved. There was now a warrant out for his arrest, which gave me some comfort even though they hadn't caught him yet. She said these guys usually mess up eventually and get caught, but to stay alert just in case. I thanked her and hung up feeling both better and worse at the same time. Standing there in the cereal aisle, I realized I'd probably never feel completely safe the way I did before all this happened. Tom was still out there somewhere doing who knows what, but Sadie was alive and rebuilding her life in a new city with a new job and new friends. Sometimes keeping a friend breathing is the only victory you get, and that has to be enough. Well, folks, that's all the time we've got together today. Thanks for letting me question things right alongside you until we run into each other again. Like the video, it helps more than you think.